have a look at the news today and say, well, those smaller partners, our neighbours, those relationships are just as important strategically. How have we allowed Chinese money to have such an influence in the Solomon Islands?
Laura, the first point to underscore is what we would always say, is that we respect very much the sovereignty of each of the independent nations in the Pacific. Those Pacific Island nations are part of Australia's family. We value them, but we respect their sovereignty, and we urge them to also respect their own sovereignty and to work to preserve that. We don't want to see anything occur in our Pacific Island region that destabilises the peace and security of the region, and we'll continue to work with all nations across the Pacific to seek to preserve that peace and security, and to seek to avoid any type of actions, construction or otherwise, that could undermine that in any way.
But we now see that this is on paper. It's not quite signed off on, but this is on paper. Was this a surprise to the government when it was leaked yesterday?
Laura, look, I won't go into what might be surprises or otherwise, intelligence briefings or discussions with foreign governments or the like, which we hold confidential. What we can say publicly, and as is known, is that the Solomon Islands, at the instigation of their Prime Minister, sought to extend the bilateral security agreement they have with Australia. That's something that crucially is part of our partnership. That in working with the Solomon Islands, Australia played a leading role in responding to instability and uncertainty there by putting our police forces with Defence Force support on the ground to assist them during recent troubles, as we've done before. But we were supported by other Pacific Island nations, and crucially, that is the model that we think is most important for all of the Pacific family, that we should have Pacific responses to Pacific problems. And that's what we've demonstrated can work, and that's what we will continue to urge in terms of how to provide that peace and stability in the region.
Is cash king here, though? Is that what we're seeing?
Well, in terms of countries respecting their own sovereignty, it is important that they don't allow themselves to be caught in debt traps, money traps, or other circumstances where that sovereignty is in any way jeopardised or undermined. It's why when Australia invests through our Pacific Infrastructure Investment Facility, it's a very transparent arrangement. It supports building infrastructure, capability, jobs, increasing services for Pacific Island nations and their communities. They're the types of vehicles that we provide. We've increased them very extensively to provide that additional financial assistance, but they also come with a transparency and a guarantee that investments are for the benefit of the people of those nations.
OK, let's talk about the New Zealand refugee deal. For the better part of a decade, your government has been resisting this. Now this deal is done for 450 refugees here in Australia. What has changed? Why is this environment any different?
Well, we've actually been in discussions with New Zealand for quite some time, so this is the culmination of those discussions. We'd put a priority on making sure we delivered on the deal we struck with the United States for resettlement. This is necessary because there's a small legacy caseload of individuals. It's only small now because we've managed to either resettle in other nations or return home, in many cases, individuals over a long period of time. Before the last election,
but your government always said,
no children in these circumstances.
Sure, but your government always said that you wouldn't send them to New Zealand because it would still have that pull factor. So what has changed?
We're now dealing with very small numbers at the end of what has been a very long process. We're confident that under our policy settings, we will manage to continue to deter boat arrivals. And one of the reasons it's a small number is because we haven't had those boat arrivals for years, because we have been successful in all aspects of deterrence, and all aspects are the crucial thing to maintain. We've got an alternate Prime Minister running at this election who said that he didn't think he could turn back boats. Unfortunately for him, that is part of the deterrence factor, and that is one of the things Australians will have to weigh at this next election. A Prime Minister who initially as Immigration Minister did manage to stop the the arrival of illegal maritime vessels and entries into Australia, and from that has avoided the humanitarian catastrophes that come with that in terms of drownings at sea, or indeed the need to detain people for long periods of time to provide that deterrence factor. And we now don't need to do that because we don't have the arrivals. Anthony Albanese would risk restarting that given his stated beliefs.
OK, well, we are well out of time, so I won't bring up the South Australian election result. We'll leave it there. Finance Minister, thank you.
Happy not to. Thank you, Laura.